Being a mother is a precious thing. As fathers, yeah, we're part of the process of children, but mothers actually bear the child, experience the morning sickness, feel the kicks, have the pain of childbirth, and then know that they have been blessed by God to bring forth a life into the world. It is such a moment. And for what you go through and for what you give, mothers, we honor you today. We do. We applaud your efforts, mothers. But on this Mother's Day, we wanted to focus on more than mothers. We wanted to bring the idea of family together. Today is more than just mothers. We're talking mothers, fathers, grandparents, children, for we all have a part to play in either the success or the failure of our families. If anyone ever tells you that raising kids is easy, slap them. Because it's not. People say, well, yeah, we've got manuals. There's all kinds of books that tell you how to raise kids. I'm telling you, none of them fit my kids. I don't know about you. It's kind of hard when you got these kids that you have to raise. There's that moment of being overwhelmed when you realize that this little fuzzball is your responsibility. And you can either do it right or you can mess them up for life. And then you realize that it's more than just how to walk and how to talk and how to behave. You're also talking about, for your children, eternity. Is my child going to know and follow God with their lives? The price of failure is immense. Moses and Joshua had led the Israelite people from the land of Egypt, the land of slavery, to a promised land that God had given them. Throughout their journey, God had shown His power in many incredible and miraculous ways. There was a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night to lead their way. There was manna, food that fell from heaven. What would that do to your grocery bill? Just food, I'll take a can of beans, God, Food was coming out of heaven. God sent bread. God sent quail. The Red Sea parted before their very eyes to allow them to cross over on dry ground and for their enemies to be destroyed. God even visited them on the mountain of God. He descended upon it and the ground quaked, and it was just such an incredible moment. And God provided water even in the driest of deserts, and these are only a few of the things that God did. And all through this journey, as long as they remained faithful to God, as long as they followed and were obedient to Him, God provided success and victory at every turn. But with all they accomplished, with all they gained, there is something that they lost in the process. In leading the people, Joshua and his entire generation, in leading the people around them, the leaders of Israel had forgotten to lead their own families. And because of that, their families were lost. In Judges 2:10, it says this: after a while, the people of Joshua's generation died, and the next generation did not know the Lord or any of the things He had done for Israel. They didn't even know God. And that reminds me of a verse in Mark 8:36. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? What did it profit them to gain all of the blessings of God and yet to have their family miss out on them? The greatest privilege and the greatest responsibility given to us as parents is the eternity of our children. In Deuteronomy 6, beginning in verse 4, it speaks to this. It says, listen, Israel, the Lord our God is the only true God. So love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Memorize His laws and tell them to your children over and over again. Talk about them all the time, whether you're at home or walking along the road or going to bed at night or getting up in the morning. Write down copies and tie them to your wrists and foreheads to help you obey them. Write these laws on the doorframes of your homes and on your town gates. God wants us to make sure that our children do not miss out on the blessing of knowing Him. God expects us to be the driving force in directing our children to God, to Him, to develop within them a faith that is more than words, but a faith that is filled with action, obedience, and service. Well, how do we do that? How do we fulfill that responsibility? How do we ensure that our children will experience God's blessings and not His wrath? Well, I think we can learn something from the experience of Hannah. Hannah had everything you could ever want. She had a loving husband. She had a great family, missing something, but they were fairly well off. They had all the things you could ever want. She was beautiful and young, and she had a great relationship with God. But the problem was she didn't have any kids. And in those days, to be a married woman and not have children meant that somehow God had deemed that you were not worthy to bear a child. It was one of those things that would cause her to be the topic of discussion when all the women gathered to get their water at the well. Elkanah, her husband, had another wife. Her name was Peninnah. Elkanah loved Hannah more than Peninnah. I mean, I know that's not fair, not right, but it was the way it was. But Peninnah had children, and Hannah did not. And so she rubbed it in all the time. The family did its annual journey to Shiloh to worship, and Hannah was going to use this opportunity to really plead with God for a son. Her prayers were intense. She prayed for a son, and if God would give her a son, then she would make sure that he was dedicated back to God to serve Him. In 1 Samuel 1, beginning in verse 10, she greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come on his head. You see, Hannah prayed. And then her family left Shiloh. They returned home, but God, however, did not forget. In 1 Samuel 1:19, it says, Then they arose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord, and returned again to their house in Ramah. And Elkanah had relations with his wife, and the Lord remembered her. She never forgot. She never forgot her promise to God to dedicate her child to Him. To dedicate Samuel to the Lord meant that he would be raised in the temple, that Eli would care for him. Now please, as we do our dedication service this morning, I don't want to take your kids and raise them. I can't raise my own, okay? Deb says she's got 3 kids. This is a different kind of dedication. This is not leaving your child before God and walking away. This is handing your child to God and say, God, this child is a blessing from you, and I give him or her back to you. And then God says, here, you take them home, and you raise them for me. This dedication is different. It's about offering them to God and then taking them home to raise them. Do you want your children to go to heaven? Do you want your children to experience the blessing of answered prayer and God's help in their lives? Do you want your children to be able to overcome the peer pressure and the sin around them? To be able to live a good and wholesome life? If so, then it's up to you to raise them to know God. Joshua left a generation that didn't even know who God was. Don't do that to your children. So what does this dedication mean? It means that you will promise to raise your children and lead your family to honor God. It means that you'll set an example of faithfulness in your life, because do you realize that your children are watching you? As adults, Do you find yourself saying things that your parents said before? Absolutely. Did you promise to yourself you'd never do that? Probably, but you do it anyway because you watched and you listened and your parents' lives rubbed off on you. Parents, it's so essential that we set the example of faithfulness in our homes. James tells us in James 2 that we should be able to show our faith, to show it by our actions. This is a commitment to live out those actions to set an example of faith to our families. It means that you'll teach your children right from wrong, not from the world's perspective, but from God's perspective. It means that church and Bible study become a priority for you and your family. Do you realize our children face so much in life? They need to know God. Is there anything you wouldn't do to protect your family from danger? Anything you wouldn't do to keep them from getting hurt? Then realize that their greatest danger is an eternity in hell for not having known God, for not having followed God. So this is your chance to make a statement with your life that the blessing God gave you in that child is not going to fall on deaf ears. Not if you have anything to do with it. We're going to, in just a moment, play a video. And this video speaks to the commitment that we are about to make. And I know we've never done this before, and some of you are like, what is going on? Why do we have our kids while the sermon's going on? Because our families are being lost. Because our families are struggling, because children face so much, because we only have them for a limited time, and then they have their friends, and they have television, and they have the internet, and they have their games, and they have this, that, and the other thing, and they're all taking them away from God. And we must draw the line. We must make sure that our families are not lost in the process. This is an opportunity for us to stand up and say, no, my family is too important for that. Not only do I want to go to heaven, but I want to make sure that my child goes to heaven. Not only do I want to have the blessing of God's presence in my life, but I want to make sure that my child has the presence of God's blessing in their lives. Not only do I want to know that I have a future, but I want to know that my children have a future too. And that all starts with us. That all starts with parents. That all starts with setting that example and living a life. And this is about to be a dedication where we promise to God, where we make a vow, where we enter into a covenant with God and with each other that we are going to do our very best. We are not perfect, but we are going to do our very best to make sure that our children know God and have the opportunity to follow Him. As the video plays in just a moment, I want you to pay attention to the words spoken. And I ask you as a family, mother, father, children, grandparents, to step forward together during the video. To step just to the front of the stage, and together we will make a commitment before God that our families are too important to lose. During this video is your opportunity to come. During this video is an opportunity to say not only to your children, but to say to each other and to say to the world around us that it stops right here, that our children are no longer fair game for Satan and the evil of this world. We are going to do something now. We're going to show them who Christ is in our lives. That's the opportunity we have. In just about 5 seconds, 10 seconds here, we're going to play that video, and I ask you, as a family, would you step out? Would you come up? And would you make this commitment today? Let's pray.